Good afternoon, this is Brian. Today is Monday, March 27, 2023, and I'm here at Rancho Mission Canyon Park near San Carlos, San Diego. And it is time for another episode of Trees of San Diego. So I know I missed last week. I wasn't thinking about it because I was in more of a nature park. However, this week, I want to take a look at this majestic tree here. This is river red gum. This is Eucalyptus camauldulensis. It's a medium to very large evergreen resinous aromatic tree in the Myrtle family, the Myrtaceae. And it is one of the most commonly seen species of eucalyptus here in San Diego, and it's also one of the most widely distributed species of eucalyptus in its native land of Australia. It's found through a large majority of the Australian landscape, more so inland, especially interior river valleys and canyons and floodplains in the outback, the bush of Australia. So this is a tree you'll come across a lot if you're going through the outback. I think it does reach the coast in some spots, but it's typically more of an inland tree, but it is very widely distributed. So what we have here is, this one's a fairly moderate sized specimen. This is probably about 60 feet tall. But these trees have been known to get well over 100 feet, even here in San Diego. So what we have here is a tree with different forms of foliage depending on the age of the tree or the age of the branch. Now, your typical adult leaves, or your more typical leaves, are these here, sickle shaped with about a 3/4 of an inch to an inch long leaf stalk or petiole. They're kind of sickle shaped, so they kind of curve a little bit. That's pretty typical in a lot of eucalyptus species. Now, these trees also have juvenile leaves, and juvenile leaves are generally found on seedlings, young saplings, and younger branch sprouts from the main tree. So let's go take a look at those really quickly. This one does have some juvenile foliage on it, or I'd say more intermediate foliage. See, the adult leaves are quite wide, but the juvenile leaves are a little bit shorter and a little broader, as you can see here. Sometimes almost ovate on younger specimens. But you can see here, this is a younger sprout. You can see it's a young sprout from the branch, and it's got wider, less sickle-shaped leaves. Almost ovate. So, as I'm getting ready to go put in a new set of batteries before it cuts me off mid-sentence, I'm gonna go swap the batteries, take a couple pictures, and we'll talk more about this pretty cool species of tree and some of its history here in Southern California proper. Okay, so a couple of pictures of the foliage. You got to see some more juvenile, more intermediate, and adult foliage. So there are multiple stages of the leaves. The juvenile, which are broader, the intermediate, which are a little narrower, but not quite that long, skinny sickle shape, and of course the long, skinny sickle shape of the adult leaves. So let's talk a little bit more about Eucalyptus camauldulensis. So, trees are quite variable in shape and size depending on the environment they grow in. And since these tend to grow quite well here in Southern California's climate due to some similarities in climate and similarities in temperature for some, they do very well and they flourish and they naturalize. So what happens is you'll have these canyons here in San Diego, and they will germinate and grow at the bottoms of the canyons, usually not right in the water, but usually a little bit above it, so at least they can have some chance to dry out. But they do like the soil moisture deeper down, and that's why, another reason why we call it river red gum. They do grow in sometimes riparian areas. They can also be quite drought tolerant and quite heat tolerant as well. You can find these. They find these sometimes planted in the deserts too, here. And if they live in interior Australia, parts of interior Australia get over 110 degrees. So they're pretty well adapted to heat. Let's put it that way. And they do take some chill too. They do take some chill down, I believe, into the 20s, maybe the 20s. I don't know, maybe even upper teens. I've seen them growing in the Mojave Desert, the higher Mojave Desert, where sometimes it gets down to 20, sometimes even 18 degrees at night during the winter. So they do have some cold tolerance as well. They're not exactly really tender when it comes to that. So why are they so rampant here in San Diego and other portions here of Southern California? It's because of a couple things. Of course, we mentioned that the climate is pretty amenable. Then also, these trees were planted back in the 1800s in masses because they're very fast growing. Eucalyptus trees, especially Eucalyptus camauldulensis, is a very, very fast growing tree. So you're getting these trees that are getting up to 60, 70, 80 feet tall very quickly and maturing very quickly and getting large, wide-based trunks. So all of a sudden, you know what? These fast-growing trees might make really good plantation trees that we can use to cut down and use their wood, especially for railroad tidings during the railroad era. So what happened was, lots of trees were imported from Australia. They were planted in masses and masses of these trees. What happens is they matured, and then of course they were harvested, and then they were used for railroad ties and other projects. However, come to find, the wood was not very good. Wood can be very weak on eucalyptus trees, Eucalyptus camauldulensis being one of them. Wood on eucalyptus trees can break and snap quite easily. So it made a very poor choice for a lot of the wood projects, the lumber projects that were being initiated in the 1800s. So a lot of times when you hear about big storms or big Santa Ana winds blowing, you'll see a lot of trees that fall. A lot of them are eucalyptus trees, and a lot of their branches are very weak and they're prone to branch failure. So a lot of times they can break off almost without warning. So here I am. Am I speaking negatively about a tree? Brian, what? No, I'm just stating the facts. Honestly, I think they're quite handsome trees. They do very well in our climate, and they are attractive. They have a very nice, graceful silhouette, kind of a somewhat open crown. As you can see here, pretty sparse but open, and with some very gracefully drooping branches. So they're very handsome trees. And a lot of species of eucalyptus are graceful like this. So it's a very graceful looking tree. It's a handsome tree. It's a very hardy tree. But again, when these trees are planted in masses, they did tend to invade our coastal canyons here in San Diego, coastal and foothill canyons. So they do get established quite a bit. So that was the legacy. So what happens when they found that these trees were not suitable for lumber, they left the trees, and then the trees naturalized and spread, which they find a good climate. It's only natural. It's part of the adaptation of the plant to where it's living, is to try to survive and procreate. So that's what they do. They do very well. Okay, so now we're going to talk about some other features of this tree. So a lot of times what we'll get is a lot of times we'll get a nice big straight bole or a big straight trunk, as this young one here exhibits. A lot of times they'll be very tall, very upright, and they get tall very fast. This tree is guaranteed. This tree is much younger than I am. almost 41 years old. And I'm pretty sure this tree is probably, I don't even know if this tree is even 20 years old, or even maybe even 15. I said these trees are very fast growing. So a lot of times you'll get a kind of tall, straight bole, and on older specimens, a very wide, very broad trunk. And then they get different forms of bark too. A lot of times what you'll associate with Eucalyptus camauldulensis, and a lot of species of eucalyptus period, are these mottled flakes that peel off periodically. So you get a little bit of a mottled look. You see here. Now when the trees get older and larger, the lower portions of the trunk, the bark is more furrowed. It's still peeling, but it's more furrowed, and sometimes it doesn't look like it peels much. So sometimes you'll get more like furrowed bark at the base of these trees. So the bark's quite different looking on different trees. Sometimes it looks like this, sometimes it's mottled and peeling, sometimes it's shreddy and peeling, and sometimes it's just really rough and dark gray. The bark's quite attractive. So now I talked about the leaves, I talked about the trunks. Now I want to talk about some of the other features of this plant in the next clip. So I'm going to get a couple of pictures of the trunks of the trees, and I will see you on the next clip. Okay, so I shot some pictures of the bark of the tree, some of the branches of the tree. So, being that a eucalyptus is a form of a flowering plant, an angiosperm, a eudicot, it flowers and sets seed in fruits. Now, the typical eucalyptus flower in this tree forms the quite typical eucalyptus flower. Kind of looks like a little powder puff. It's kind of a little small, puffy. There are no petals on eucalyptus flowers. Only a bunch of stamens that come up from the center of the flower. And fortunately, this is not the blooming time. I think they bloomed already. But they're small and they're usually in clusters, rounded clusters. And then what happens is the flowers get pollinated, and then they turn into fruits. And the fruit of a eucalyptus tree, basically all eucalyptus trees, it's a seed capsule. And the seed capsule opens up and sheds the seeds. And you get different types of seeds. You get really light brown flakes that are usually sterile. They don't have an embryo in them. And then you get the little darker ones that have a little more substance to them. Those are the ones that are more likely to germinate. So let's go see if I can find some seed capsules within reach. I'm really surprised because eucalyptus trees are known for shedding a lot of litter. So let's see if I can get close enough to where I can show off what the seed capsule on the Eucalyptus camauldulensis looks like. And the seed capsule on it is not really a super big defining factor of determining it being Eucalyptus camauldulensis versus being other species. And I will go briefly into that as soon as I'm done. But let's see here. Let's look up here and see these seed capsules. These right here, these are what sometimes they call them gum nuts. They're not nuts, they're just woody seed capsules that usually open into anywhere from 3 to 5 chambers and sprinkle the seeds all over the ground. And you see here on Eucalyptus camauldulensis, they are in pretty decent sized clusters and they follow the flowers. So the seed capsules are already starting to open. I can already see looking like they're going to open up pretty soon. I wish I could get a little bit closer to some seed capsules. I was really hoping to. But they're kind of small, rounded, and usually open up in 3 to 5 chambers. Usually 3. Usually 3 is a pretty typical number. And they sprinkle the seeds all over the ground. And in areas that get a lot of moisture, you can get a lot of germination. So with that being said, now I kind of want to showcase another species that is kind of similar to Eucalyptus camauldulensis and can be easily confused by somebody who's not well versed in these different species. We have more species of eucalyptus than I can even imagine. And there are a lot of species I still don't know how to tell apart. A lot of species I don't know how to tell apart yet. So that's definitely work in progress for me. Certain species, I've seen them so many times, I know what they are, and I don't have any problems telling them apart from the other species. But there are some species that are just really hard to tell apart. So I'm going to get into that momentarily. I'm going to try to zoom in and get a picture of the seed capsules. And then I'll see over by another species that's kind of similar. Okay, so I'm in another species of eucalyptus that, to the person who's not extremely well versed in eucalyptus diversity, might look exactly like a camauldulensis. The bark's very similar on it, though there are some slight differences if you really look carefully. And you really have to look carefully and be pretty well versed in some of these trees. So what we have here is Eucalyptus cladocalyx, the sugar gum, which is found in South Australia. It's another tree that's not native here, obviously. It's from Australia, and it is quite well suited for our climate. This one might not be quite as, maybe not quite as cold tolerant as Eucalyptus camauldulensis, but it's not exactly a weakling either. And it's quite drought tolerant too. So this is from South Australia, the southern part of the area, and the state of South Australia. And it's a tree that can get very large, very similar to Eucalyptus camauldulensis. One thing is, you can see the leaves here. These are adult leaves, and they're not quite as narrow. They're similar, but they're not quite as narrow as Eucalyptus camauldulensis. Maybe not quite as narrow and not quite as long and not as strongly sickle-shaped, though they are sickle-shaped. This is Eucalyptus cladocalyx. And they're juvenile leaves, because they also have a set of juvenile, intermediate, and adult leaves. The juvenile leaves are basically very round. I've actually germinated Eucalyptus cladocalyx before, and I've seen saplings and seedlings many times. And their juvenile leaves are very round, much more rounded than Eucalyptus camauldulensis. So, with Eucalyptus cladocalyx, there is a little bit less of a weeping habit. So I'm going to try to back up and get a view of this tree from off here on the side a little bit. There's not as strong of a weeping characteristic. So you can see the branches don't droop down as strongly as Eucalyptus camauldulensis. And a lot of times when these trees get large, and these trees can get very large too, they can probably get to about the same size as camauldulensis. Like I said, even the adult trees, see, camauldulensis kind of has a weeping habit. Cladocalyx kind of has like a bushy, kind of sparsely, kind of like puffs, in branches and sprays of puffs. When you see a very mature, older specimen here of cladocalyx, you're going to be looking for more of like a puffy branch structure, with like long, naked branches with puffs of foliage at the end of them. It's kind of like puffs of foliage. This is not a very old tree. This is a fairly young tree here. And then the leaves are a little bit thicker and more leathery on Eucalyptus cladocalyx. Leaves are much thicker, generally thicker, and they're not quite as aromatic when you crush them. You kind of have to crush them hard to get the eucalyptus smell, and it's not not as strong on Eucalyptus cladocalyx. And the bark again is very similar, mottled, very mottled, shreds and peels away quite often. So that's pretty characteristic of Eucalyptus cladocalyx. But like I said, the leaves are not quite as narrow. They're a little thicker and more leathery, and the tree does not have a very weepy crown. And in addition, the seed capsules are very different looking on Eucalyptus cladocalyx. Let's go see. So, as you saw on Eucalyptus camauldulensis, hopefully I was able to zoom in closely enough. Eucalyptus cladocalyx has more urn-shaped seed capsules. This is Eucalyptus cladocalyx. They're not small and as rounded, and there's a deep depression before you get to the chambers where the seed capsules open up and the seeds fall out. So that's Eucalyptus cladocalyx, a very similar species. And there's another species of tree that's very similar, and that's called lemon-scented gum, which is Corymbia citriodora. And Corymbia, the genus Corymbia, is very closely related to Eucalyptus. And those ones are, again, very similar. In fact, this is a lemon-scented gum right here. So lemon-scented gum is also remarkably similar to Eucalyptus cladocalyx. This is lemon-scented gum. Corymbia citriodora. Corymbia was split from the genus Eucalyptus, and the Corymbia is called the bloodwood section of the Myrtle family. And they're very closely related to Eucalyptus. They look just like Eucalyptus. But just like on Eucalyptus cladocalyx, the seed capsules are not round, they're more urn-shaped and sunken in. So those are more round, and the leaves have a very nice citronella aroma. The bark on Corymbia citriodora tends to be whiter. It's also mottled and splotched, and it peels. But it tends to be a little bit whiter. But like Eucalyptus camauldulensis, Corymbia citriodora also has a weeping habit. Now, when I'm talking about Eucalyptus cladocalyx and its urn-shaped seed capsules, and Corymbia citrioda's urn-shaped seed capsules, now that's kind of a coincidence that their species have similar seed capsules, because in general, the genus Corymbia has very urn-shaped seed capsules, the bloodwoods. And here's Eucalyptus camauldulensis again. This is the camauldulensis up close. See? Very small, kind of rounded seed capsules. And you can see the chambers. The chambers rise up above the top of the seed capsule, whereas they're sunken in on cladocalyx and Corymbia citriodora. Corymbia citriodora has characteristic seed capsules of the genus Corymbia, urn-shaped, sunken in at the top. It's just it's kind of coincidental that Eucalyptus cladocalyx has those as well. So there you go, Eucalyptus cladocalyx. Not really much of a weeping habit. Corymbia citriodora, a lemon-scented gum. Again, it's another Aussie native. Corymbia citriodora is native more towards the Queensland portion, Queensland in eastern and northeastern Australia. And of course, Eucalyptus camauldulensis, which is found more widespread along the continent. So, I'm going to take a couple pictures and we'll see what's up. So I do realize that I did kind of go off on a tangent when I started talking more about Eucalyptus cladocalyx and Corymbia citriodora. However, I wanted to tie it in to show you how similar a lot of eucalypts can be. Now, trees and plants in the genus Eucalyptus, Corymbia, and Angophora, which I don't see any Angophoras right here to show you, are all three lumped together as eucalypts. They're fairly closely related and are very similar looking as well. Very similar looking genera, and generally native to Australia. So I just wanted to try to put in perspective how challenging it can be to identify some of our street trees and non-native landscape trees without taking a look at the other species. So it can get quite complicated. And there's another species that's very similar, and it's called manigum, Eucalyptus viminalis. Eucalyptus viminalis is very similar, even more similar to Eucalyptus camauldulensis. That's probably one of the most similar species planted here in Southern California. And yet again, it's another Australian native. Now, the bark is extremely similar. Bark is very similar to camauldulensis, our main topic for this a little bit more longly winded video than I anticipated. But it's manigum, Eucalyptus viminalis, again, has the same shreddy type bark, only you'll see a lot more of the bark peels caught in the junctions of the branches. So if you look up in a Eucalyptus viminalis, the crown is usually tighter, pretty dense, and you'll see lots of bark peels hanging in the junctions of the branches. So you'll see a lot of shredding bark hanging up there. And another major difference is Eucalyptus viminalis, the juvenile leaves are very narrow and they're oppositely arranged. So Eucalyptus viminalis, if you see a tree that looks like camauldulensis, you'll see some juvenile sprouts that have narrow leaves that are oppositely arranged, and lots of shreddy bark caught in the junctions of the branches. You're pretty much looking at Eucalyptus viminalis, a very similar species to camauldulensis. And the seed capsules on viminalis are very similar too. Very similar. And the white flowers, same thing. So just a little extra detail I wanted to express about talking about these trees, because even some of our non-native landscape trees can be kind of tricky if you don't know what details to look and find. So I'm hoping that this does help not only bring to light what we have growing here in San Diego, but how to tell it apart from some of its other very similar brethren growing here. So that's going to do it for my a little bit longer than usual trees of San Diego. I really hope you enjoyed this as much as I enjoyed filming it, and hope to see you out there checking out some of these trees for yourself. See you on the next episode.